Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning. And I think we'll likely have some more who will continue to join as we move forward this morning. I know many of you, but not all of you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Byers. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Des Moines Partnership. And we are pleased to be hosting this panel discussion this morning on a very, very important topic. And that's education and what we need to do to help get our kids caught up from the delays that have been the result of the pandemic. And I know we've all been hearing about that and learning more about it and doing what we can as school systems, as a state, as a business community, as nonprofits to help to get our kids back on track. And so that's really the topic we're going to be talking about today. Just to share a few things, last year when the pandemic hit, spring break, a couple of things the partnership worked on was we worked pretty closely with the Des Moines Public Schools to get kids and families connected for online learning and working with MediaCom to help those families and households who otherwise were having problems connecting for online learning. Also launched last year what we called the DSM Tutor Connect initiative, in which we connected primarily college students who are studying education with families who are looking for tutors. But throughout the entire pandemic, have been working closely with our school systems and nonprofits as bringing kids back to school and what that looked like. But we do know that with the learning loss from at the end of last year and certainly a number of kids this year, primarily some of those who are doing online school, but some who just completely fell through the cracks. And we know we have a lot of work to do moving forward. So very, very much looking forward to discussion today. Just want to let everybody know the Greater Des Moines Partnership is all in terms of doing what we can do to assist all of you to help you more successful and to, again, help our kids get back on track, because today's kids are tomorrow's talent and workforce. And so it's really important that we continue to focus on these issues moving forward. So my pleasure to introduce to you the Greater Des Moines Partnership's Senior Vice President of Talent Development, Dr. Marvin DeGier, and he will be moderating the panel this morning. So Marvin, take it away.
Thank you, Jay. And again, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Again, today's program, we're joined by state officials, local leaders of school districts, and some of our local nonprofits that are leading the way in making sure this summer our youth are getting back on track and being able to move forward as far as we progress, and make sure that not only are they learning the things that they need to, but make sure they're also being prepared for the future that comes before them. I'm going to introduce our panel today. I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Bradley Niebling, Chief Bureau of Learner Strategies and Supports from the Department of State Education. Joined also by Mimi Willoughby, Des Moines Public Schools Academic Pathway Supervisor. Kate Bennett, our Community Impact Officer for Education from United Way of Central Iowa. And also by Dr. Lisa Remy, Superintendent of West Des Moines Community Schools. So again, thank you all for taking the time to join us this morning. We appreciate you for carving out the time out of your busy schedules this morning. We're going to get right to it. I want to make sure that we can get as much information out to the community as possible this morning. So I want to start with Dr. Niebling. If you could talk about what is the data showing for just the loss of learning in the state overall?
Sure. So we've got a few pieces of data that we've been drawing on, knowing that there's more to come. A lot of times we don't make evaluations of a school year until we look at the data across a whole school year, but we're getting close. But there are a few indicators that we have seen: learning loss, and really more specifically, unfinished learning, if we think about it, because the schooling process has been disrupted so much end of last school year and in varying degrees in different districts this year. Students just haven't had the same opportunities because of that in a lot of cases. We've certainly seen and heard from around the state cases where there are more students in high schools not passing classes compared to typical years. We've also got data from our early literacy implementation efforts. This is a law that's been in place for 9 or 10 years. And it's really focused on early literacy skills. And there are universal measures that are administered across the state. And when you looked at, compare the data from the fall of the 2019-20 school year, so last school year, And then you look at the fall this year, for grades kindergarten through third grade, we saw a drop in the percentage of students at benchmark, anywhere from 6% to 21% fewer students at where they needed to be starting the fall. And that's, again, pretty much all students K-3 across the state are drawn from that data set. So those are some indications to us that we have seen an impact in terms of learning, and we've got more unfinished learning than we would in a typical school year.
Thank you, Dr. Niebling.
Sure.
Dr. Remy, what are you seeing in West Des Moines community schools around the loss of learning?
Thank you. I could reiterate really what Brad has shared. So we are waiting for more pieces of data as well as we get our Iowa assessment data will be coming back to us here really shortly. But as we've looked at our screening data throughout the year, we're definitely able to see gaps in the learning for our kids across the board. I would say that our buildings where we have a higher free and reduced lunch, our students of color, that's where we're seeing a larger gap than our buildings where we have fewer students in free and reduced lunch. So it's definitely apparent in all of our buildings. At the elementary level, looking at that screening data, but even more apparent in some of our buildings that have a higher percent of free and reduced lunch and a higher percentage of students of color. What's been interesting is in those buildings, we've also had a higher percent of our students who chose to learn online this year. And so while I can't say 100% that has made a difference, we do believe that there's been some impact with those students who have been learning 100% online all year. When I look at our secondary data, we are looking at grade data, and we do have more students who are not passing classes. Again, we're seeing that correlation with those students who chose to remain online for the entire school year, even with the supports that we've provided for our students. So I know we'll get into another question, but that's really made us think differently about what we want to offer this summer to be able to help with credit recovery, unit recovery, etc.
Thank you. And so, Mimi, are you seeing similar things at Des Moines Public Schools?
Yes, I mean, I would just piggyback off of what everybody else has been saying. The gaps in learning, a lot of unfinished learning, I guess is what we're seeing. I also want to note that a lot of our students, especially the secondary, may have just completely stopped attending because they needed to work. A lot of our students were frontline workers. They were the ones at Target and Casey's and delivering food. And, while other people were working from home, they were out hitting the streets and actually holding us up in a lot of ways. And so they gave up a lot of their learning to provide for their family and be a support system for our community, ironically. So a lot of unfinished learning, some gaps, and definitely gaps in skills. I would definitely piggyback off of what Dr. Remy noted that with the virtual instruction. To be a great virtual learner, you have to assume that everyone's on their reading level of that grade level to access a lot of online learning independently. Regardless of how much support system there is. So, it's gaps in learning, gaps in skills, a reduction of credit, acquisition. And again, I'm curious about the data and the impact of that through this pandemic, and we have to just wait till those numbers come out.
So, Kate, I want to bring you into this question as well. I know with United Way, you all support a wide range of districts in Central Iowa, and you do a lot of after-school program. What are you all seeing from your numbers and data?
Well, we don't have the same access to the data as what the school districts or Department of Ed would. But I think what we've been hearing from our partners throughout the pandemic, and especially going into the summer, so maybe this kind of transitions into the next question, was wanting to balance not only the recovery of learning or the finishing of learning, but just supporting kids, and welcoming them back to schools. I know we've had a lot of conversations with DMPS about wanting to, just get kids comfortable coming to school again. Of course, we want to recover the learning and support that as much as we can. So we have several school-based. We're supporting programs in West Des Moines, Carlisle, Perry, Des Moines, but then also all of our nonprofits. And this year we feel really fortunate. We are getting a lot of specific partnership with Des Moines Public Schools around curriculum that's going to be offered in the buildings, and then places like the Y, CFUM, and other nonprofits able to mirror that with what they're offering for their programming. So, we've always had a focus on trying to balance the recreation and reading and all those things, but I think even more so this summer, we want to do that, but also just get kids back into the habit of a routine and make sure that they know the importance of school, families feel comfortable. It's just kind of a reset for all of us, right? Today is our first day at United Way back in the office. Well, half of us came yesterday, half of us came today, and everyone was just a little bit it felt like the first day of school. What am I forgetting? What do I not have? I forgot something. So it's hard for everybody, and not to mention kids. I have 2 kids in Des Moines myself, and my daughter went back hybrid. My son has been virtual all year, and I can definitely know for him, it will be an adjustment going back. So.
Well, thank you, Kate. You kind of led us into the next phase.
I'm sorry.
So it's okay.
Never let me talk, Marvin.
It's okay. You're doing just fine, Kate. So Dr. Niebling, based off of that, just overall, I know the state does a lot of investing in summer programming prior to the pandemic, and based off of the data, what adjustments have you all had to make sure this summer is and to be able to respond accordingly to this past year of the pandemic?
Sure. So this preparing for this summer is definitely different than preparing for last summer. Last summer, there was still a lot of uncertainty about what we were heading into for the next school year in a lot of ways. So it was more about getting ready for the next school year and much less about, at least from a statewide perspective, programming for the summer. And Lisa and Mimi can attest to this. Most of the programming decisions around summer opportunities happen at the local district level. We try to support that as best as we can. Something that's going to continue to come forward here, and I can put a link in the chat window to some of this, but there's an emphasis from some of the relief money that's been sent out to states from the U.S. Department of Education that's really intended to focus on before and after school programming, but also summer learning opportunities. And so for our role in this, we'll be putting out some guidance here in the next few weeks to lay out some, not just the parameters around the funding, that is part of it, but just trying to do our part to synthesize research and best practice things for schools to use, knowing that local implementation of those things can look different depending on what the needs of the district are. So we're continuing to pull together resources to try to do some of that curation for districts and schools, knowing that we've Des Moines and West Des Moines are well equipped to do a lot of that work themselves, being larger districts. But even in the metro, we've got smaller surrounding districts too that don't always have the resources to do that review and curation. So we're going to put those things out. And I said, we've got a little bit of guidance here that I can put in the chat pod if people want to see that too. But our role is really going to be to guide and to provide resources for locals, districts to make decisions for themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Niebling, and please do feel free to drop that information in the chat. And just as FYI, for those that are joining us this morning, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. And as we get closer to the end of the program, and if we have time still available, we'll have a time for question and answers as well. So Dr. Remy, leading off of what Dr. Niebling said, what are you all doing this year differently than what you've done in prior years when it comes to programming for the summer in West Des Moines Community Schools?
Yeah, thank you, Marvin, for that question. And, I feel like I would I need to say that we should also celebrate some of the learning that did happen that may not have happened due to the pandemic. So for example, we had a learning management system at our high school, but not at our elementary level. So you think about all the learning that our students have done around the use of technology, even our staff members. So staff, students, and even our families, I imagine, had some learning to do as well, especially when we were fully online. So the use to be able to communicate differently via technology, giving feedback via technology. So there's been a lot of positives that we need to think about too as we come out of this pandemic. But more specifically to your question, West Des Moines Community Schools has offered a summer program. We call it Stretching Minds for many years. It really has focused on kindergarten through sixth grade for many years. And then we've in the past probably 5 to 6 years added 7th and 8th grade. And that really was about taking students who might have those gaps in their skills and trying to do some remediation over the summer and close those skill gaps between spring and when fall. This summer, we are continuing with that model, but we're expanding as well. And we're changing a little bit our focus during that time. So for example, at the elementary level, they will really have a focus, a very laser focus on literacy and making sure that we have print books that we're sending home with kids, reading. I mean, literacy will be the main focus at our elementary level. At the middle school level, we're really focusing on literacy and then math literacy as well. That's where we're noticing some gaps and need that enrichment piece as well as remediation. I should also say that it's very important for us to continue to look at the standards and grade level standards for kiddos. So not really thinking about, hey, what did students maybe not have access to last spring right away, but what are the grade level standards where all students should be? And then when we're noticing gaps in students' skills or their learning, then filling those gaps with on-time learning, but yet always giving all students that access to those grade level standards. So those will be what will be the curriculum that we're using again in the summer. Something that we're adding is at the high school level, 9 through 12, based on the number of courses that students are failing. We really feel that we need some credit recovery and unit recovery access to our students. So we've identified that. We've invited students. That may be a week for some students. It may be 3 weeks, depending upon the needs. So more individualized. We've also, at Crestview Elementary, Sylvan is coming in to support summer programming for our students with learning. Also, we have always had extended school year services for our students with IEPs, but this summer, the IEP teams, they've really looked even closer at the data and what programming should we put in place, and those decisions have been made at that IEP level. To determine. So there would be more students will access ESY services than what have been previously done in the past. We've also really found the need to focus on our ESOL students, so our English students of other languages. So at the high school level, we will be providing some language development classes for students. At elementary, we'll have some experiential learning as well as language development. We will offer some summer tutoring at one of our elementary schools because we've seen that need. Summer writing boot camp will be offered for our high school students. And then at one of our elementaries, Western Hills, we have a dual language immersion class. And we're also seeing a need that we should support some of those students this summer. So we will have a course going on called Comida and Culture, which food and culture. So we've definitely expanded the offerings this summer. Some will happen in June, some June through July, and some in August will be starting.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Remy. So Mimi, what are you all doing over at Des Moines Public Schools this summer? Kind of feeding off of that.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that we're doing what we've always done. We've always monitored data closely. And respond with urgency, whether there's a global pandemic or not. And, we offer a lot of reading, literacy, and math and phonics skills gaps summer programming, similar to what Dr. Remy noted for West Des Moines schools. Those will be happening in the morning, and then there's afternoon activities with, United Way's help and your help with, engaging back into school and connecting childcare for parents, just community building activities. And then similar to the middle school, and then we have a transition program for our 8th graders into high school. We have central campus camps that happen so students can have access to that specific programming over at our central campus. For high school, again, we've just expanded what we already do with credit recovery. We have a very robust, very successful credit recovery program. We have more than one. We have the Flex Academy summer credit recovery program. Students work at their own pace, and seniors you typically get access first. But with the help of the funding with COVID, we are able to offer that to as many students as we can. I'm really proud to give a shout out to our staff who's stepped up to teach this summer after a very long year, and everybody's exhausted, and so that's it was heartwarming to see that the staff has just stepped up to continue to support our students. We still we'll offer a virtual summer credit recovery program. We have a unique ELL Flex Academy that we've run for students that need an ELL environment and more support in that area. We have our Options Academy, which has been very successful, and that's studying the high set exam and doing that kind of credit recovery. So again, it's finishing the unfinished learning for the first time. And I think as long as I've been here in Des Moines Public Schools, we're going to be doing some unfinished credit recovery with our Central Academy students who have unfinished classes as well. And I'm just excited. It's from, pre-K to seniors, and every single student will get access to finish their courses and hone their skills.
Thank you, Mimi. Kate, I know you mentioned a few things earlier. Did you have anything additional information around summer opportunities and things you all are doing the United Way this summer?
I don't think that I have anything additional, just to kind of reiterate based on what everyone said. We just want kids to feel safe and connected, and that's really our goal for the summer. And so supporting the nonprofits that we work with, as well as the school districts, to make that happen.
Thank you. So knowing that we just are getting, this past year through the pandemic, and it's created a lot of different scenarios from online learning to in-person hybrid opportunities. And as much as the business community has had to adapt, how do you all feel the pandemic will change your approach for the future of education and how you serve your youth moving forward? And Dr. Niebling, I'll start with you as far as from a state perspective.
Sure. So really to build off of what Lisa and Mimi and Kate were all sharing, really want to emphasize a couple things. One, our educators are real heroes here for the last year and a half, and the educators have always stepped up. It's not that, it's just we've been in unprecedented times. These are part of our frontline workers, and to keep everything else moving, they've been working diligently to learn new skills in far below an optimal environment for trying to learn to do something new to scale on a dime. So we can't overstate that at all, how much work that's been. So I just want to recognize that. And as we head into the summer, and the question being here, How does this maybe change the way we look at education moving forward? And I think from my perspective, where we are at is we've always had a need to, and I think Lisa was talking about this, make sure that we're focused on grade level learning. And that challenge is greater now because there are more gaps and more unfinished learning than we are used to. So I think in terms of trajectory, the high standard that we have as a state, that our districts and our communities hold for student learning, has not changed. We still have a high standard for student learning, and we've always been pursuing that. I think what this is really going to laser focus us on are two things. One, the need to accelerate learning, so to bring along just-in-time learning for kids and where they've got gaps. We're going to need to be more systemic and more intense about being able to do that. We need to make sure that we are focused on effective curriculum and instruction design and assessment, for that matter, to make sure that we understand where students' learning is at, so we can keep them on that trajectory. The unfinished learning won't be finished at the end of the summer for a lot of students. This is a multi-year journey, and our goal is to get them to where they would have been, if not beyond, by the time they are done with high school. So we're going to need to focus really hard this summer, no doubt about it. And we just heard several great examples of work that's going to be done that's important, but this is a multi-year journey to quote unquote catch back up. So I think that's going to be part of it. The other part, and we've been in this window for a while now, but I think there's an even greater focus on it now, and that's the social, emotional, and behavioral health of our students. They have been we've asked them to go to school, be it hybrid, completely online or completely in person, in the middle of a pandemic. This is stressful on them too, and just how that spreads out through families and communities and the institutions that we are part of. So we cannot underestimate the need to support the social, emotional, behavioral health of our students. So that comes in the form of things like social emotional learning, and being really intentional about that. Having making sure there's access to mental health services and wraparound services for students. So that's going to call on continued partnerships and growing collaborations between schools, community providers, for example, of mental health services is going to be really big. And the last bit here to kind of come full circle anyway on what I was sharing is we need to make sure we're being attendant to the social, emotional, behavioral health of our educators as well. If they are having a hard time, no matter how professional they are, it's hard for that to not impact what you're doing when you're at work. That's not just educators, that's anybody. So we need to make sure, because we're kind, caring human beings, and it matters that we're attending to the social, emotional, behavioral health of our educators as well. If we invest in our educators that way and build up support around them and doing that, good things are going to happen for our communities, for our students, for our businesses, and otherwise. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Dr. Niebling. So, Dr. Remy, would you want to add on to what Dr. Niebling was speaking to as far as just how in West Des Moines Community Schools you all will be approaching things for the future education opportunities for the youth you serve?
Yeah, Brad mentioned several of the bullets that I would have shared as well. So, we will continue to look at data like we've always looked at data. That's going to drive decision making. As I stated earlier, we had acceleration with the learning management system and skills of being able to teach online. And I think it would be, we need to continue utilizing those learning management systems even when we're back fully in. So how can we, and we'll be spending some time with some professional development for our teachers around this topic this summer, but how can we take that tool that primarily we use to support students who were remote learning, but now if we have all of our kids back how do we personalize learning utilizing that learning management system, and even provide some enrichment, maybe that before school, after school, and even how can we utilize that tool for learning for ourselves as adults. So we will continue that learning this summer. But I think something else that Brad mentioned there that is important in West Des Moines Community Schools, we had a team of adults really learning over the last year prior to the pandemic around social emotional learning. And because we really wanted to get that more embedded within our system. Well, the pandemic really forced us to accelerate that learning and make some decisions. And so we really this past year focused on our adults and really having our adults learn around the SEDMH. But now this fall have a plan to really take that to our students. Also have a survey through Panorama that we will push out to our students so that we can be giving feedback around that. Students can be assessing themselves, be setting goals, which I think then will also help the academic side, right, with the learning and the skills. So this summer we have some learning for staff around social emotional, behavioral mental health, as well as restorative practices. So we're going to have teams trained in each of our buildings so that we can utilize those practices across our system starting this next school year. So one of the things that I will say surprised me, we did a survey of our families in February just to see how many might want to continue online learning, that they really saw it as a benefit for their sons or daughters. And we had a large percentage actually say, yep, we still want that as an opportunity. So we went through the process from the Department of Ed to be an approved online learner, our online learning system. We were approved. So when we put that out to our families to say, okay, we're approved, here's what we're offering, here's what that will look like, we actually didn't have enough families select the option to be able to offer it next school year. So we've notified the department that we're going to put a pause on that. But I think it's an interesting data. I don't know what that tells us yet. We definitely want to support our students in whatever way they learn best, whether that's in person or online. But right now, what we're seeing is that most want to come back into our buildings starting in the fall.
Thank you, Dr. Remy. And so, Mimi, what is Des Moines Public Schools thinking of doing things potentially differently for the future on how you serve your youth around education opportunities?
You know, I have to speak from my heart and perspective on this one. You know, as far as the district's concerned, again, we always look at data and respond with a sense of urgency, whether there's a global pandemic or gaps in social justice, racism, discrimination, poverty, chronic illness. You know, I could go down the list of outside factors that disrupt learning and access to education and just basic needs. We are expanding our virtual campus to include middle school. There is a high demand for that, and we're excited to offer that for starting next year. I think that for Des Moines Public Schools, there's never, I think what's difficult in an urban education setting is that, you know, one size doesn't fit all. It's very difficult, even in a tier 1, to offer a one size fits all. And I would argue that for teachers too. I think what the pandemic has shown us is definitely the health and well-being of our teachers is just as important as our youth. And that it does matter how they feel, and it does matter what positions they're in, and if they find meaningful attachment to their work, and if they can sustain that meaningful attachment. Some have found to be very successful being an online teacher and want to continue to do that and have been able to apply for those jobs. And that's exciting. Similar to students. Again, in our tier 3, students were always able to work online. They were always hybrid optional. They always worked at their own pace. So, you know, that's something we'll just continue to expand. I hope that expands in the tier 1. Like Dr. Remy said, is using the disruptive innovation of technology and online learning in a really meaningful way for access missed learning opportunities, students that have chronic illness, accidents, teen pregnancy, things like that, maternity leaves for students. And that it really does come down, I think that what the pandemic highlighted was, even though we're large systems, it still matters what the individual level looks like. Whether that's, we had to look at each kid. We had to, because if someone didn't log in for a week, that's a problem. Same with a teacher. We had to look at each teacher and how they were doing and how well they were accomplishing. We had to look at our learning management system, how we were offering virtual instruction, what technology we were using. So to piggyback off of what everyone has said, is taking this pandemic and the tragedy from this and making it into a positive as best we can, and innovating education moving forward.
Thank you, Mimi. And you all have mentioned quite a few times the wraparound supports, holistic student services. In my previous role, that was something we focused on every day for every adult and young person, but regardless of age and where they were coming from in life, and meeting them where they're at. So, Kate, I'm going to kind of pivot to you a little bit with this question, but understanding how United Way has been a strong funder and supporter of these wraparound supports in the community, how has the pandemic changed your approach for the future around your education goals, considering you all are, recently just launched new goals? Is this something that you all can speak to as far as just what you've seen over time as well around what they're speaking to for not just the classroom, but the things that are happening every day in life?
Yeah, well, you're right. We do have a new framework, United to Thrive, which I can talk a little more about later, but I want to kind of go back to what Mimi was saying. And I think the quick thing that we learned from United Way as this whole pandemic unfolded was it wasn't about how great this nonprofit was or this nonprofit was or this school district was. It was about who has the relationship with that kid that can find and help that kid. And so it really did come down to those individual relationships. And we were so fortunate within our greater Des Moines area to have so many nonprofits that are connected with kids that really needed help. And I remember talking to the team, Mimi's team, and with Allison, with community school coordinators, they had kids that they were trying to find last summer to get them food. And it might be a kid that Art Force Iowa was working with, or LXito. And so at the end of the day, it really didn't matter what school district they were in, or if, it was just who is the best person to have that relationship with that kid. So I guess how that translates into what we would do moving forward is really want to double down on supporting those organizations that have those relationships. And I would say for the past 5 years, I guess it's probably my fault because I've been here, but we've been very focused on grades and attendance. And we've been having our nonprofit partners even measuring grades and attendance, which is nice because we're able to report back out to our volunteers. Okay, every child at Boys and Girls Club is attending school 90% or more of the time. But at the end of the day, is Boys and Girls Club making a relationship with that child to really support them in their school? So how do we balance those things? It's not that we don't want our after school programs to continue to have an academic focus, but we want schools to do that, and then the nonprofits to support the other pieces. And then the other thing, I think all the nonprofits realized, us included, we couldn't access kids at school. Right? We're so used to relying on schools to be that access point for kids for mental health services. We have health and dental and vision screening services that take place in schools. We have partners that are used to picking kids up in schools. And once schools weren't that access point, everyone had to pivot. So I don't know exactly how we learn from that, but I think there's learning somewhere.
Thank you, Kate. So, my next question for all of you is what can the business community do to help through this process? Even one question from the chat was, in the community overall, to make what you all have seen as far as the gaps and knowing where you need assistance is to make this a reality and better opportunities for our students moving forward. What can the business community and those from the community do to help you all come alongside and support you? And at this time, kind of pivot a little bit. I'm start with Dr. Remy. How do you feel they can come along and assist in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Marvin, for this question. We can always use volunteers, right, in our classrooms, whether that be during the traditional school year time or in the summer, working with students, reading to students, working on math literacy with students, supporting students in that way. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. One piece too that I guess I think about when I think about the business community is maybe helping us identify, so what artificial intelligence, what AI have we not tapped into or thought about that could possibly be implemented in schools to help, whether that be help with student learning, help teachers have a lot on their plates. And sometimes I feel as though if there's something from that technology viewpoint that could help them release some of that could help them focus more on each individual student. So I don't know necessarily what I don't know right now, what I'm saying, but I do from a presentation at one of our Heartland AEA superintendent meetings, I do believe there's some untapped learning for school leaders around artificial intelligence and how that may help us in classrooms so that our staff, because it's all the teachers, and they make the difference, right, in the classroom. And so they just need that time with kids. So maybe the business community can help us with that learning piece, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Remy. Wouldn't it be great for every school district to have access to artificial intelligence opportunities? Mimi, what do you feel the business community can do to help Des Moines Public Schools and the community as a whole?
I would ask that the business community and our community as a whole never forget what it felt like to experience this community trauma together, because I can tell you that our at-risk youth feel this every single day. And that's what it feels like every day, to feel constant stress on your system, on your lives, on your families, that you never think it's going to go away. And we have to remember what it felt like, because with community trauma, we were all equal in this pandemic. Nobody was safe, but we weren't all, there wasn't equity and access to food and healthcare and mental health services and, working from home, childcare, and that's where I feel like the community has really stepped up, because everybody was going through it. But when we return to our white privilege and we return to that, which we're starting to, we can't forget what it felt like. And that's actually empathy. And so we need to build empathy in our community, whether you work at a profit or a nonprofit or a school. We really can pivot to altruism if we want to. We can choose to as a community. If we look local and we talk local and we connect locally, we can do that in Des Moines and the greater Des Moines area. We can choose to do that. We don't have to go back to the way it was. This is actually, for me, a tipping point of what I've been trying to communicate for so many years working in Tier 3 and at risk, is that we can be a community. We can care about each other. We can fight for equity and social justice and access. And I think also from the community is helping us innovate our old schools. When I go look at, I went to Valley High School for the first time 2 years ago, because I'm not from Des Moines, and I was just blown away with how beautiful it was. I really was. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really nice. And I'm happy. I want that for kids. And I want the kids in Des Moines Public Schools to walk into a school like that. We can renovate. Help us renovate. Help us innovate our schools. And so, and also just being kind. being kind to our community members, being kind to people. That's what I think is when we walk into a business or the business walks into the school, and caring about each other finally, and that's kind of my thing.
All right, Dr. Niebling, I know the state has pushed a lot around work-based learning and other opportunities. What other ways outside, including work-based learning, do you feel that the business community come alongside and help?
I think I'd really just echo what Lisa and Mimi have been sharing. When I was preparing for this and thinking about this question, the two top things that came to mind was be present with districts and in partnership and listen to what they need. And I think the reverse is true as well. Districts and educators being at the table with our business community and asking them what they need. We're better together. That's what community is, right? And our schools and our businesses are part of what make up our local communities. And if we're going to be successful collectively, then we need to be at the table together and understanding what the unique needs are in those communities. So that's what came most to mind for me. A piece inside of all of that you mentioned that is important and that we really hope continues to grow over time across the state are work-based learning opportunities as schools work and prepare students to be future ready, right? And I think being at the table together, we can better understand. I mean, it's such a powerful opportunity to bring authenticity to the learning experience for students to be able to do their schoolwork in their community with business partners. There are lots of ways to make learning authentic. That is one, and it's a really powerful one. So I think if we can continue to expand our network of work-based learning opportunities for our students, and we may be able to leverage technology in ways we haven't thought about before to do that, which is a pretty exciting outcome, I think, from the challenge that we've been through over the last year and a half. We may be able to leverage technology to increase that work-based learning network as well. So being at the table with each other, listening to each other, finding those opportunities to move forward together, because ultimately we're all serving our community. And if we have our focus on that, it gets a lot easier to sort through the details of how we do it.
Thank you, Dr. Niebling.
Mm-hmm.
Kate, I know United Way has for decades after decades worked with the business community to help do more. And so how do you feel that during this, as we're coming out this pandemic, that the business community can do more to help and get everybody back on track?
Well, I think that's an interesting, that was probably my hardest question to answer on all this, because yes, United Way has a huge role to play in bridging the business community, the nonprofit, and the schools. But sometimes, in all honesty, I feel like we are either harassing them, schools, to do something for us, or demanding that they let us do something to them. And so knowing that we have a new equity focus in our United to Thrive framework, and probably overall as a community, knowing that we're coming out of a pandemic where some communities and some students are going to feel the effects for longer and more deeply, I think we have an enormous responsibility to listen to schools about what they actually need versus presuming, which we are the number one guilty as charged parties at United Way, as presuming we know what school districts need. I mean, Mimi probably thinks I think that I can do her job, but we need to listen and do what they ask us to do, and hope that they will ask and they will trust us enough to tell us what they need, because I really think that there are things that we can do as a partnership, but if we don't do it together, it will fail, as it maybe has in the past. And I think that we can't impose our own agendas, but at the same time, we have learned a lot. We've learned a lot about virtual learning and technology. And I loved what, I think it was Dr. Remy talked about, that even teachers have, increased their technology. So what can we take away from that? And how can we turn that into a positive thing, that learning can occur in all environments, and how do we as the nonprofit and business community support that? So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I don't have the answers, but I think the most important thing is to ask them what they need and listen, and then do what they say they need.
Marvin, I don't mean to like go out of turn, but
No,
one other thought that I had is, and I know the state's passed as well, but broadband, right? So that expansion is critical for across our state of Iowa, whether it's here in central Iowa, people may think that we don't have a need, we have a need, as well as in the rural communities. So that's definitely continuing to support that move in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Remy. So I'm going to pivot as we're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to try to get a couple of questions from the chat. We've touched on part of one, but I want to ask, as we get past the summer and we start to think about the fall, what are you all thinking more as far as increased mental health supports and services for both students and staff that you may try to have for the fall once we get past the summer? And Dr. Remy, I'll start with you on that one.
Okay, well, we currently have, our guidance counselors in every building. And then in our secondary buildings, we have multiple. So that's, definitely a positive. We probably 4 years ago added behavior interventionists in each of our buildings, which helps tremendously with the background that they have. We also have a partnership with 2 different mental health organizations that come into our schools on a regular basis for families who want to access their services. And then we also have a partnership or a contract with EFR, or Employee Family Resources, our Student Assistance Program, and so forth. We have started having discussions, no final decisions yet, on are there areas to expand. So for example, with those 2 organizations, we only have a day or 2 a week. Should we expand those opportunities? Should we consider what possibilities there are with some of those federal funds to support? Because we even have difficulty sometimes, though we have a lot of services, having people access those services. And some of that, even though there's sliding scale and so forth, it's still the cost is a barrier. So how do we remove barriers so that students have that, truly see that they have access, or families know that they have that access? So those are the conversations that we've just begun and have not finalized at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Niebling, is there anything the state is thinking of doing to help support increased mental health services for the fall?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to provide some examples, but as I lead into that, I want to note that unless a district is already trying to do something, trying to add 10 new things at once is a tall order, right? So I'm sharing several examples, but I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, everybody go do all of this right away. It really depends on what's already happening locally and what they've got the capacity to add. So with that being said, one is an investment in positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is really, for folks that aren't familiar, a way of saying we're going to use data to make sure we understand what students need and have a continuum of services and resources available to students. And that what we do with most of the students is going to meet most students' needs, knowing that some students have additional needs. So an investment in positive behavioral interventions and supports. Part of that would be, and this is sort of on the prevention side for mental health, is social emotional learning, which I believe I mentioned earlier, but that's where we can teach skills to students around self-concept, self-advocacy, well-being, how to effectively resolve conflict, all of these things that feed into social skills and the like are really important on the prevention side of things. The third thing that I want to mention here is because of various pieces of funding that have come, relief funding from the U.S. Department of Education, we've got access to some funds that are really targeted around mental health. So one example is it's called Gear 2. And I can put a link in the chat here for that as well. But right now there's an open application process going on where schools can apply to the department. We're managing it at the Department of Education, but it's a fund that's allocated to the governor's office that we're using over $8 million of to provide to schools to be able to provide mental health services and wraparound services. There still need to be people to hire and partner to do all of that. But what I'm saying is part of what we have at our disposal is some money that we're distributing through a competitive grant process to get some funds in schools to hopefully be able to pay for some additional mental health and wraparound services and service coordination for districts and schools. So those are three things that we've got going on right now. There's also been a lot of legislation about this recently in the last few years around telehealth, for example, and having that be potentially a billable expense if it's provided in schools. What a benefit that can be for many. So there are a variety of things going on right now because mental health has been a focus even before we hit the pandemic, but this is really shown the light on it a lot more than it has even before the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Niebling. As we come to the close, I want to just give you all at least one opportunity still for a brief, just kind of last comments or words of wisdom for those that are embarking upon providing education opportunities for the summer and beyond to get our youth back on track. I'll start with Kate.
So I just want to thank everyone for being on this panel. This was hugely informative. And I would say, United Way, we're in a transition. We're wrapping up our education, income, and health, which was our 95% graduation for the 3-county area, Polk, Warren, and Dallas by 2020. So we fell just short of that, but we did make almost 10 percentage point gain, and that was across the 3 counties. So that is something we're hugely proud of. And had COVID not hit, we might have actually made the 95%. But knowing that, we know that moving forward, COVID aside, we want to continue our focus on high school graduation, but really work to integrate more post-secondary planning into what happens in high school and even starting as early as middle school. We know that's where it needs to start. And so that's, again, back to the business community where we can meaningfully engage with schools in some of that work. And so there's so much, that COVID has taught us, but I don't think we would ever lose our focus on wanting kids to be successful. And hopefully it's also taught us that we can be innovative and have solutions for kids that will evolve our education system beyond what it was. And I think everyone here on this panel would agree that there are some positive things that we can learn from COVID moving forward. So I just look forward to that collaboration as well as our work on our equity focus and really trying to work with the kids that need us the most.
Thank you, Kate. Dr. Remy, any closing thoughts or words of wisdom?
Yeah, I guess closing thoughts, I would say, just remember how important that communication is and that partnership between home and school. So if you are wondering, where is my student? What should I be doing? Don't be afraid to either email, pick up the phone, have that conversation, because it truly is a partnership between us here in the school system and you at home. So just pick up the phone.
All right. Just for y'all that are joining us today and those that'll be, this will be available on our YouTube channel for the Greater Des Moines Partnership for you all to come back and watch again. I just want to again say thank you for all the panelists that were able to join us this morning and for all of you that were able to join us live today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules and joining us for this important conversation. So thank you all for joining me today, and I look forward to working with you all in the future. And until next
Thank you.
time,
Thank you so much. Take care,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.